Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Boosting Biotech Mentorship Session, Accelerating Rare Disease Therapies, brought to you today by Novartis. My name is Rob Stoddard, and I'm President and CEO of BioAlberta. I will be your host and moderator for today. First of all, about our Boosting Biotech program. Boosting Biotech is a collaboration between BioAlberta, Innovative Medicines Canada, Alberta Jobs, Economy and Innovation, and Alberta Health. The initiative provides Alberta post-secondary students with experiential learning opportunities by providing internship positions with Alberta Biotech SMEs, as well as mentorship from IMC member companies. With our second intake for companies, we are able to support another 23 more intern positions this year, providing SMEs with much needed resources and students with valuable workplace experience. Mentorship sessions such as the one today provide a broader audience with learning and access to opportunities with global pharmaceutical experts. In addition to the Boosting Biotech partners, I'd also like to recognize and thank BioTalent Canada for supporting our internship program. If you're interested in hiring a student, there are subsidies available for up to $7,500 of the wage of the student. Contact BioAlberta after the webinar for more information. Before we begin and I introduce our keynote speaker today, I'd like to go over the format and mention some Zoom etiquette we will follow today to keep things moving along smoothly. First of all, this is a recorded session and will be available after as well. Please mute your microphones to avoid distractions. We're going to ask you to use the raise hand feature to ask questions. Brent has said that he wants to take questions in real time, not wait for the end, and the session will be in two parts. So please raise the hand function. I will call on you to ask your question at the end of a slide. Don't put your questions into the chat. There's no need for that, as you'll ask it live. For those of you who haven't found it after 9 months of Zooming, the raise hand feature is located in the participants icon at the bottom of the screen. And as I said, the slides will also be available after the event. If we don't get to all your questions today, we will make note of them and answer them afterwards. Now on to our speaker. Brent Warner is the Vice President of Gene Therapies and Rare Diseases at Novartis Pharmaceuticals Canada. Prior to Novartis, Brent held various roles across the pharmaceutical industry with BioMarin, Biogen, Baxter, Baxalta, focused primarily on launches in rare disease space. Prior to joining industry, Brent worked across healthcare agencies and a consumer marketing company. Brent, thank you very much for your time today. The audience is all yours.
Thanks, Rob, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. You know, I was thinking about how to kick this off because what I really love is this title, Accelerating Rare Disease Therapies. And if you look at the last decade, and even the last 2 decades, what we've seen is truly an acceleration, not only in understanding rare disease, but the therapies to treat those rare diseases. And I was reflecting back on my own experience with rare disease that I thought I would share with you. It was, I think, my second job out of university. I was working for a marketing advertising agency in the US. And they were working closely with Baxter at the time in hemophilia. And, you know, I was new to this space. I don't have a bioscience background. And I'd come in with a marketing degree saying, you know, I'm going to take over the world. I really want to get into this industry. And I remember my first advisory board sitting in the back of the room, right? The guy who was putting all the Post-its on the sheets, taking notes. And it was a patient advisory board. And I remember this mother standing up and talking about hemophilia and talking about her son's disease or disorder. And I remember her saying, like, the first week, you know, her son was born, she took him home from the hospital, and the baby had bruises all over the body. So she took the baby to the ER because that's what you do. And she was telling the story of how she was interrogated by the nursing staff about, you know, how could you do this to your son? You know, have you been hitting them? Have you been hurting them? And, you know, you could see like the tears rolling down her face, right? And this story was 17 years prior. And then she got to the point that said it took weeks to get to a confirmatory diagnosis, but when we did, you know, I put my son in the middle of the floor, put pillows around him, and I didn't want to touch him. I didn't want to hold him because I didn't want to hurt him. And that's what we're dealing with rare disease. That story has always lived with me because it's you know, that's one of millions of stories of someone who's been afflicted by a rare disease, who's had this unfortunate diagnostic odyssey to try and get to a confirmatory diagnosis, and then to learn either there is a therapy or there isn't. And if there isn't, you have very few options ahead of you. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help these families, right? Not only get to faster diagnosis of their disease, but we're trying to accelerate therapies to treat these diseases so that no mother, no father, no family, has to have this type of a story, and that we can, hopefully give people, more normal shots at a real life. So I wanted to start with that story because it's always sat with me, right? Whenever I work on a therapy or work on a launch, I always think back to that moment and really what we're trying to do. And it's to help people like Karen, that was her name. It's to help people like Karen, right? Get to a diagnosis, but then also have a therapy to treat their son or daughter. So we thought we would break this conversation today into two parts. Rare disease and why it's a focal point, and then pre-launch planning and commercialization. I think we'll spend, predominantly most of the time upfront in part one, but I'd really like to have, a discussion on part two. And with an hour of time, we're unfortunately not going to be able to go into a whole host of detail, but please ask questions. Please, raise your hand. This time is for all of you. And we were saying before, if we can inspire one person, one group to go further to develop a therapy that, we hadn't thought about before, that's a huge win for society, and that's a huge win for patients. And that's what we're trying to do. So I thought I'd start with, why is rare disease, such a focal point, and why now, right? We've known about rare diseases for decades, but why, over the past decade, over the past 2 decades, has it really become much more of a topic, and why have we seen more therapies coming through? I thought it'd be appropriate to start with, what is the definition of a rare disease? It's thrown around a lot, right? Rare disease. And we thought we would show the US definition and the European. So in the US, it's defined as a prevalence of less than 200,000 Americans. And in Europe, no more than 5 per 10,000 people. They're kind of similar, right, when you look at them side by side. But the hallmark here is that there is no globally accepted definition of rare or ultra rare disease. And what's fascinating, like when we were preparing for this and I was trying to think about Canada a bit more, Canada actually doesn't have an official numerical threshold for rare disease, but it cites a descriptive definition, which you can see here, which is a rare disease is a life-threatening, seriously debilitating, or serious and chronic condition affecting a fairly small number of patients. Now, I think you probably all have a different view on what is small, right? If you take the US definition or Europe, or if you have your own number, there isn't a clear number in Canada. And to me, this continues to represent a hallmark and an opportunity within Canada to really kind of build and develop and formalize the rare disease strategy, which doesn't really exist today. There's been work that's been done on it through CORD and other groups, and they've made great attempts at kind of really bringing, what is a rare disease strategy for Canada? But unfortunately, it hasn't been implemented as of yet. And if we think about it from a numbers perspective for a minute, purely on the numbers, and this blows my mind every time I see this slide, there's 7,000 known rare diseases today. And I guarantee it is increasing every single day as we understand more and more about the human body. But the staggering piece of all this, the staggering numbers, 350 million people globally are affected. If you think about that for a moment, you probably know someone, right? You probably know someone through a friend who has a rare disease, or you know someone who has a rare disease and they probably don't know it yet. This is the interesting part of all of it, right? I always think about like the Kevin Bacon rule, right? The 7 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon. We probably all know someone who has a rare disease, and we learn more and more every single day about it. But what more, and I find this interesting, and I have to read it from the paper, when you look at the 7,000 rare disease, 80% of those are genetic, 30% of patients die before the age of 5, with more than 50% of rare diseases affecting children. 50% of rare diseases affecting children. Those are, children who probably don't have a shot at, a truly great life because they've been afflicted with these diseases. We have an opportunity to help those children. We have an opportunity to help the adults with their rare diseases. And this is what we're up against. We're up against helping people, kind of live their life to the fullest. And I think there is an incredible opportunity across the board for us to continue investing and thinking and finding therapies to help these patients. And, to take those numbers and to put it into context in Canada for a minute. So 350 million people globally have a rare disease. What that means in Canada, 1 in 12 Canadians has a rare disease. I'm sure all of you have at least 12 friends, right? So if you take that into context, one of those friends probably has a rare disease. They may not know about it yet. They may not have the symptoms. They may be asymptomatic. But the numbers are staggering when you think about it. And the number of Americans with a rare disease is larger than the number of Americans with diabetes. And if you don't know the American landscape quite a bit, that is pretty compelling to me and pretty alarming too. When you think about, diabetes continues to be a very big disorder in the US that is continually managed. Number of Americans with a rare disease is larger than that with diabetes. It still blows me away every time. But, when we come to this point of why is it in focus now, right? Why has it been in focus in the last 1 to 2 decades? It's partly because our understanding of the human genome has continued to grow. If you go back to the early 90s, October 1st, 1990, was the start of the Human Genome Project, which really was the pinnacle of us truly starting to understand, all the specific mutations in the body, why certain diseases, present itself in some patients, how we could potentially target some diseases, and I'll give you an example in a moment. And that completed in April 2003. And following the early 2000s, you start to see this kind of multitude of therapies starting to come to market, starting to go into development. And this 13-year endeavor, truly has enlightened our drug and diagnostic development. And through that project, the Human Genome Project, it's revealed that there's 20,500 human genes. So an incredible number of genes. And if you think about, diseases that we've known about for long periods of time, take von Willebrand's disease, right? Or take, spinal muscular atrophy for a moment. We've known about SMA for over a century, but really we didn't understand the root cause of it until, we were able to fully map the genome. So this, project, which felt probably small to some people at the time, has really been the hallmark and the pinnacle of drug development in our understanding. So you have this kind of better understanding now of the human genome as a starting point. But what you also had worldwide is kind of an influx in global legislation, which has really fueled, kind of investment in drug discovery and also accelerated access in most countries around the world. And it really started with the Orphan Drug Act in 1983 in the US. This to me was kind of the pinnacle of, orphan diseases, focusing on rare disease. And then what you saw over, the next decade is legislation coming through in Singapore, Japan, Australia, then you have Europe coming online in 2000. All of these orphan drug legislations has essentially said, we recognize rare diseases are, important. We're going to find pathways to help accelerate access to these therapies. And that truly has kind of invigorated, right, drug development in rare disease. So we understand, what's the basis of the disease. We understand how we could potentially target. We have legislation that can really help accelerate. And then there's a third, but I did want to call out before I move to that. If you look at this slide, you're probably wondering, where's Canada, right? Where's Canada with an orphan drug legislation or a rare disease? And it doesn't exist yet. There is an orphan drug pathway with Health Canada priority review, which, essentially allows you to take a 12-month filing down to several months. But the hallmark legislation, right, of kind of rare disease strategy hasn't been implemented yet. And I continue to think that this is still an opportunity that Canada needs to invest in for the future. And you'll see why in a couple of slides. I have a slide that will show you all of the therapies being developed for cell and gene therapy in rare diseases. And it's pretty staggering when you think about what's coming. So if you think about what's coming, we need legislation, right, to work in the favor. So understanding whole genome mapping, now we've understood, the legislation piece. Our kind of technology has also continued to improve. And I really love this slide. We were building it specifically for this meeting. And I was thinking back, like it'd be great to plug, a couple of diseases in here, like hemophilia, and you can plug all the different therapies that have been developed over the years. And I think it would be pretty compelling to just look at, how these therapies have evolved. Back to the 70s when we had small molecules that we were just starting out with, to the 80s, which was the introduction of recombinant proteins, which really started to change the game a bit, right? We were able to get a bit smarter with the therapies, and they're still being utilized, across the world today. Like the technology continues to improve and get better and better, kind of like software updates, right? You continue to improve it over time. And in the 90s, you had the introduction of the monoclonal antibodies, which are your bispecifics that really, I think, introduced kind of a new way of targeting diseases that presented, kind of more precision, right? And then you in the 2000s had the introduction of cell therapy on the oncology space. We tried gene therapy in the 90s, and unfortunately, there were some issues with some of the early gene therapy programs that put a pause on development of gene therapy for a number of years. In 2010s, you had the introduction of RNA therapies, and you had these like beautiful antisense oligonucleotides and RNA technology introduced. And if you don't know what ASOs are, they are these incredible assets that are designed to do one thing and to do them very, very well. And you're seeing them, you're seeing the use of them starting to increase exponentially across therapies. It allowed us to get more precise as an industry with treating these diseases, right? We know, on a specific area that we have a mutation or kind of an absence of a gene, we can specifically go and target that area, and specifically go to that exact spot. Like these are beautiful assets. And then you had gene therapy, gene replacement therapy come, over the last several years, which was really the hallmark of 30 plus years worth of work to finally get here. And what we're seeing is the first introduction of, AAV, which is like a really exciting space. I think you see a lot of different assets and therapies being developed early stage right now. And you'll see in a moment, there's a considerable number of therapies coming in the gene therapy and cell therapy space to really start targeting, these diseases. And then where we're going, and it's just 2020s and beyond, is CRISPR technology, which is really about gene editing. Being able to go splice out, the gene that's not working and, enter a new one in that will hopefully, kind of repair what wasn't working before. And if you look at all this whole timeline, it's all about evolving the precision in our treatment. And I really like this word precision, because as we've kind of gone through the decades, we get smarter and smarter, and we get more and more precise, where we're able to specifically go to exact spots in the human genome and do things that, we had talked about in science 30, 40 years ago. And, we often say that, the future is now. It really is. If you look at some of the therapies coming, it's such an exciting time to be in this space. And, if you look at cell and gene therapies, on its own, 900 INDs have been filed with the FDA. I think this number is extremely out of date by now. 362 cell and gene therapies are in development. 132 of the 362 are for rare diseases. 200 INDs are expected each year moving forward. which is really kind of that wave piece, right? Like the number of therapies coming worldwide to treat diseases, over the next decade, you're going to see more and more potentially coming through. Over 100 diseases are being explored for treatment with cell and gene therapies, which is really exciting that we're able to deliver these remarkable treatments to patients. The future is very exciting here. And then I think it says 6, but I think it's 5 diseases currently treated with approved cell or gene therapy. So why I show you the numbers is because the numbers lead to this. And if this slide doesn't wow you, I don't know what will, because I think Kim King, who's on this call, we were talking before this meeting and I showed her this slide and she went, wow, like this is pretty incredible. On the left side, you have, adoptive cell therapy, which is typically for, oncology space. And if you focus on the center, right, your bullseye, you're looking at the marketed therapies, and then you have your filed. And then there's a few in pivotal, but really where the band comes in is phase 1 and phase 2, and even back to, the earlier stages. There's so many therapies potentially coming. It's an exciting time. And it's an exciting time for patients, to have these potential therapies, right, at their fingertips in the future. And then on the right side, if you look at gene therapy, on the extreme bands, you have the different diseases that are being explored. You have your hemophilia B, hematology, metabolic, neurology, ophthalmology, otology, other. There's a few in the marketed, there's several in the filed, there's quite a bit in the pivotal, but really, again, that outer band of different therapies coming. And when I look at, like a therapy such as Duchenne muscular dystrophy, significant number of therapies that are being developed. And if you think about the DMD audience, if you don't know this this disease area, this is a disease area that hasn't had many options over the years. There's been, one recently approved in the US, and I think there's another one, but there's quite a bit coming. And for a space like DMD and others that, have gone from having nothing to potentially, multiple treatments to choose from, this is such an exciting time. So, when we bring it all together, we were talking about this slide of like, this is the Holy Trinity of sorts, right? It's bringing together, you have your increased diagnostic of capabilities, and now we're able to specifically know where to go and where to target. You have the human genome, which played a big part of that. And then you have the Orphan Drug Act in '83, which kind of really started to lay the framework for, kind of rare and orphan diseases. And it's really been the 3 of these together that have, really accelerated not only the investment from industry in, rare diseases, but, our understanding of them. And we're also seeing, I would say quite a bit of, patients who are, starting to finally get to confirmatory diagnosis. There's been a lot of testing programs that have scaled up, whether it's via genetic testing or newborn screening or 23andMe, which has really allowed, I think, patients to take better control, of their own destiny, right, and truly understand what's the issue afflicting them. I don't know about many of you, but I've actually done the 23andMe test, and I had some angst on it. Do I want people to have my data? What does that mean for me? But it was really compelling to look at it. I mean, there were some things even on my marker that I wasn't even aware of, right? And there were things that they're testing and adding on every day. So it's really an exciting time, right? As a patient too, to be able to get to a place where you're able to say, like, I can spit in this cup, right? Send it off to a lab and get this report back that not only tells me like my lineage and my history, but also, can start telling me, what, maybe, that issue I've been having is something bigger. And to me, this is the wave of the future of getting to like these whole genome mapping, where we're really able to start understanding more about what's going on at the patient level, and then being able to really deliver and build these precision therapies that can do something so much better for patients than we ever have been able to before. So, I threw a lot at you. I didn't really pause a whole lot for questions, but you can probably tell, like, I'm pretty excited about this, because where we're going, is really exciting. I mean, like you're continuing to see, even outside of cell and gene therapies, antisense oligonucleotides coming, RNAi technology coming. I mean, like the plethora of therapies that will be at the hands of physicians to be able to treat their patients is incredible. It's the most exciting time, I think, in the industry that we've ever had. So with that, maybe I'll pause before we move to our next section to see if there's questions.
Looks like everybody's so focused on hanging on your every word, Brent, that they just want you to continue.
Well, please,
oh,
again,
we have a question. Permita, do you want to feel free to take yourself off or turn your camera on while you ask the question?
Thank you, Rob. Unfortunately, I'm having technical issues with my camera and bandwidth, so I'm going to keep myself off camera if it's okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you. That was a great presentation so far. And I had a question to do with basically from your experience of working in big pharma, how does a pharma company decide upon which rare disease to proceed for? And I'm thinking about if finally for ROI perspectives, if the company is thinking of making it's going to invest a lot in actually going for the drug development. But if there are not so many people out there who really need the drug, then what is the reason for which they actually, what is their, basically what drives them to proceed down that route? Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, right? I mean, I would say two things on that one. I'll first start with kind of the hallmark of your question. It first comes back to, do we have the therapeutic expertise within the organization? I mean, that is always the primary starting point, right? Like, you wouldn't expect a company who is heavily focused in ophthalmology and neurology to go big on hematology, right? If it's not really aligned with the corporate view. So it first starts at that level, right? Where are the areas that we currently have expertise that we can, add on to help support? Because if you think about what needs to happen, to even commercialize the therapy, there's quite a bit of education. There's a whole host of people that you have to bring in with therapeutic expertise to make sure you have the right endpoints, you're thinking about the right protocols. So it starts there. And then from there, it becomes a discussion as to, is this an area that is, that we think we can target with our existing therapies, right? Can we develop something in-house to treat? And I think what you're seeing more times than not, most companies are going outside and looking at small biotechs, right, as the starting point. I think a great example of that is if you look at Avexis for a minute. So I don't know if everyone's aware, or you probably are. Novartis acquired Avexis a few years ago. And it was, we acquired Avexis. They had done work in neurology. We have a neurology portfolio, and it felt like a good complement too, because we were also exploring a therapy to treat SMA called branaplam. And that was a nice complement when we looked at when the company looked at what products sat in there. So you typically look for those complements. You look at, can you develop an in-house, or is it better to license? And I think you also see, outside of kind of MA&R, you're seeing quite a bit of licensing deals happening with kind of bigger biotech companies, right? I think in the last month, an analyst was telling me like there's like 25 new licensing deals that have just come up, kind of bigger ones. And that to me is like the appeal of the small biotechs, right? The small biotech companies have the opportunity to, go to those diseases that may not be, on the radar of bigger industry players. And you can really kind of get to, kind of a nice portfolio within the smaller biotechs of going after, kind of these ultra rare diseases, and then, either get a license deal or get acquired. But I don't know if that answered your question, but that's predominantly kind of the focus.
And Narendra, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, it's great to hear that the companies actually also focus on the rare diseases. That's great to know. My question is like at the Novartis, what percentage you guys deal with the small molecules? I know you're really excited about the gene therapy and the cell therapy, and what portion still you guys are dealing with the small molecules?
That's actually a good question. I was waiting for the question that would stump me, and it's number two. So that's a pretty good one. I think we have a few small molecules still today. If Kim King's on the line, she can keep me much more honest. Kim, do you know the number? It's a good question.
I don't know the number, but I can definitely get it and follow up.
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you for the stumper question today. It was good.
We should have a prize for those.
Yeah, I know. I feel like, yeah, we're going to give a prize out for that one. I like it.
Parmita, did I cut you off, or did you have a second part of your question?
No,
No, that was perfect. I did have a second part though, but that's okay. Do I have time to ask?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. I was wondering, and so thanks, Brent, for answering that part of the question. I was also thinking about whenever a drug is discovered, it has to go through clinical trials, and these are very expensive. And sometimes, if it is a rare disease, as you had rightly said, it's not many people on the face of the planet who probably have it or who would need the therapy. How does a company decide to go for that to make it still profitable? Or is there more like a CSR aspect or something to that we have to do it because it's in the good of the nation rather than thinking from the profit perspective?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, typically in rare diseases, you know, if you look at history for a moment across rare diseases, and if you go back and look at, you know, clinical trial design, it's costly to set up, right? You know, even though you're talking fewer patients, doesn't mean it's any less costly. I mean, you will get cost savings because you don't have as many sites or as many patients or as many treaters, but it's still a costly endeavor, right? To invest, you know, a decent amount of money upfront to try and commercialize and bring a therapy through the trials. I would say the interesting part about rare disease, though, I mean, typically you will always have your POC, you'll then always move into a phase one, but what you see quite a bit actually is the phase 2 and phase 3 being combined into one study, which, you know, does a couple of things. One, it helps accelerate drug development and hopefully can get you to, you know, a faster approval. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, candidly, but I thought the standard number was it takes, you know, upwards of, sorry, 9+ years to, and it's probably more than that, to move from like POC through kind of an approval. And in rare disease, you can shave off a couple of years because you're able to combine, you know, phase 2 and phase 3 into one. So you do have some time savings there, but it still is it's still not cheap to run these clinical trials. And you know, I think there's quite a few companies looking at how do you know, kind of better design clinical trials. Is there more, you know, that you can do to help, you know, bring in patients in these rare diseases to help offset some costs? I would say over the next few years, I think we're going to see some really interesting things start to happen with clinical trial designs with some of the startups that we're seeing on the peripheral. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
So thanks for those questions. Brent, I think we're going to move on to part 2, if you're okay with that. If anybody in the audience does have questions, please feel free to ask them at any time, or if you want to ask questions on part 1, maybe wait until the end of part 2, and we'll do that as part of a wrap up. So Brent, over to you.
Thank you. So part 2, we wanted to just go into a little bit of pre-launch planning and commercialization. You know, and we were thinking about for, you know, the startups and anyone who's, you know, thinking about starting up a small biotech, you know, if it were me, what would I want to understand? Like, where would I want to start investing, you know, from a people perspective, from a resources? So we thought we would start with, I love this statement of, we know with change comes opportunity. And I always love it. It says, we know. I don't know that everyone knows that with change comes opportunity, because some people are afraid of change. But, you know, change does present an opportunity, and we are on the forefront of change across the industry. If you go back to the first section, the introduction of these kind of unique therapies gives us an opportunity to rethink quite a bit, right? To rethink where we would normally put our investments, right? We definitely need to keep them in clinical trial design. Where do we put our investments with people? When do we bring people in? And, what we've seen with rare disease over the last, couple of decades is you can have an incredible therapy that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have access. And that continues to be the single biggest barrier worldwide, right? Is how do you ensure that you have access? You can get an approval, but how do you ensure that patients have access to therapies? And I really love these two quotes here. So I'm going to start with the one on the right. This is from Theragene, which is a really exciting company in the US. And this is from their C-suite. I've seen it done always, right? To, where you put people pre-launch. I've seen it done always. I prefer to have an HEOR person in the process from phase 1 and then build out the team at phase 3. What's fascinating and kind of the underlying pin there is we need to think about real world, we need to think about health economics. We need to think about what are the right clinical endpoints for our design? What's going to ensure that, we know we have this like great asset, we think we have something big here. How do we ensure that when it actually gets approved, that people are going to be able to receive it? And that to me it's been the area that rare disease probably needed more focus over the last couple of years. I just think about my own experience, across my span in pharma. You typically see market access, health economics being brought in late phase 2, sometimes, most times, phase 3, and you really need to start earlier because you have to think about how are we going to make sure that patients get access to this. And then on the left, I really love this one too, because what we've been thinking about quite a bit over the last few years is how do we ensure that med affairs, R&D, commercial, all the functions are operating and like really performing as kind of a high performing team. And Elevation Oncology, their VP had this quote of med affairs is the bridge between R&D and commercial, right? So he's really saying bring them in earlier, make sure they're informed, right? And this really helps with the smoother translation. And if you think about it too, right? So if you have your health economics and you have your med affairs, then you phase it out to commercial. So you really need to ensure you bring these people in earlier. And we pulled this kind of image from PM360, which I actually really like because it shows, your kind of product cycle, right, through pharma, through target selection all the way through product maintenance. And I've specifically highlighted, your phase 2A through product maintenance. This is where I think it actually becomes critical for all of you and for us to think about where can we put people earlier. If you take the quote from Theragene from the previous one, earlier HEOR and access roles become critical. And you see it now more than ever, even with the antisense oligonucleotides, the other therapies, cell and gene therapy. You need to start much earlier to really think about what is that endpoint, or what are those endpoints that are truly going to allow us to ensure that patients have access to therapy. And I know I've said it a few times, but I want you to take that message away. And then the other one, in rare disease, advocacy becomes such a critical area. And if you think about these kind of ultra rare or rare diseases, they'll typically have, for the ones that haven't had any therapies, they'll either have established advocacy groups that are kind of fighting to have therapies available, or have made investments in pharmaceutical companies or in different assets around the world to try and accelerate a treatment to become available. Or you'll have kind of your smaller advocacy groups that are just starting to figure out how they need to work for patients. And advocacy is such an important one, not only for helping to make sure that therapies continue to advance, making sure you've understood what's important to patients. What are they looking for? And then how can you help ensure that education is there? How can you help ensure that when a therapy does become available, that the patients don't have to go through these horrific diagnostic odysseys, right? How can you help shorten that time with advocacy to help find the patients, and help them get to a treatment that makes sense? And then medical customer facing teams need to be engaged much earlier. There's a whole host, particularly with the new therapies, of making sure we've helped educate the community, educate the medical professionals, and kind of learn with them as we're going through. There's still a lot that industry, and I'm sure all of you are learning every day, and that's where medical comes in, right? How do we continue to ensure that our clinicians, irrespective, are learning about kind of the different modalities, the different therapies, and kind of working with us, right? Working with us in a compliant way to ensure that these therapies can move forward. So we built this slide for another presentation, but I thought it's a good one here to share. It was really kind of built around cell and gene, but we adapted it for rare disease. And what we wanted to just have a conversation on, if you had to think about where to plug your dollars, right? If you're a small biotech or a startup, assuming you've already set up your clinical trial design and you're moving forward, if you look at the bottom on that personnel side, medical, market access, advocacy, I think I've kind of hit the nail on the head a couple of times on that one. I mean, those are so critical, right, to ensuring that these therapies, come out of the gate, strong, so that patients get access. And then for market activities, this is more of like, how do you educate? How do you ensure that people are aware? Disease awareness education is so critical in rare disease, particularly for those disease areas that don't necessarily have strong advocacy. There's not a lot behind them. Digital marketing, I think we continue to see as an area that in COVID becomes very important. And we were already making the transition towards this. And it's also cheaper, right? It's cheaper to develop materials that you can get out to the masses. Advocacy engagement, we've talked about so much, but the one I really wanted to talk about was testing services. And if you think about these like horrific patient diagnostic odysseys that can take, some patients 5, 7, 10, 15 years to get to. I actually heard a story the other day of a patient who has been living with some ailments for 18 years and just got to a confirmatory diagnosis. The person's 19 years old. 18, can you just imagine though, living with something that's been afflicting you for 18 years, not knowing what it is, and oh, by the way, I heard there's multiple treatments available for it. That's where testing services comes into play. So testing services can help shorten that patient diagnostic odyssey. It can help find patients, right, who have these diseases, to help them get on their way, right? Help them get to a therapy. And if there's not a therapy, can help invigorate them, right? To fight for, small biotechs, to fight for an industry to build a therapy, to truly help them. So as we've been thinking about, the different areas of where can we explore with our kind of go-to-market models, which is, on day zero, what are we looking at? Traditionally, in industry, you've had high branded marketing and promotional efforts, right? These are your kind of branded campaigns. DTC in the US, that's direct to consumer, is pretty big. Ex-US, there's no DTC, right? Because it's restricted through regulatory bodies. But you still have, high branded marketing around the world in your traditional pharma, so your bigger therapeutic areas. You have heavily focused on sales structures, big sales organizations, because for a disease like diabetes, right, in the US, you could have upwards of 10, 20,000 targeted physicians, probably many more, that you need to have reach and frequency to make sure that your message is heard, and that clinicians understand that there are therapies available to treat. And then you have your patient support programs. We're lucky to have them in Canada, in the US, and in some markets, in some countries, ex-US and Canada. But it's really been designed to help patients on their treatment journey. So where I think we're going with rare diseases, and I'm good to be challenged on this, is more of like a hybrid model, which is more focused on medical and that medical engagement piece to truly help kind of set the stage for, what is cell and gene therapy? What is, antisense oligonucleotides? What's RNA technology? How do I understand this for my patients? And then you have the whole data piece that clinicians need to understand, and it's heavy on medical. And I think this is an area with Rare that we can continue to push and think differently, and put more of our dollars and emphasis behind medical. We're also looking at, and I think in rare disease, streamlined account management. So moving from these big sales structures to more of a streamlined account management, which is knowing where your exact prescribers are. You typically in rare have fewer because you don't need 300 prescribers administering a therapy for 100 patients. So you can get very targeted, and with targeted allows precision with your customer-facing organization. I think there's an opportunity with PSP, or your patient support programs, that can go beyond what we've done historically and help support more accessibility. And what I mean by that, if you have, somebody living in British Columbia with a disorder, and there isn't a treatment site anywhere on the West Coast, but there's one in Ontario, how can we, as an industry and as a society, help that family, that individual, get from British Columbia to their treatment in Ontario? I think the challenge of that is always, how do you bring treatment closer to home? But I actually think in these ultra rare diseases where you don't have many experts, we could probably do more to help support patients along their journey. And then the one that I really love, and I've been talking quite a bit about lately, is these day zero investments, which is really, day zero when your new therapy comes to market. You have genetic testing online, you have diagnostics online, you have newborn screening programs online. Because what just drives me nuts at the end of the day is patients having to go through these diagnostic odysseys when there's therapies to help them. That's the part I actually think, and I would encourage all of you, as you think about kind of startups and where you want to go, and if you want to invest in rare diseases, think about how can we deliver more precision to our customers? How can we invest more in, helping somebody go from what would normally take 7 years from symptom presentation to resolution, and shorten that down to days, to weeks. I think this is a huge opportunity for all of us, and an area that I would encourage all of you to explore. So this was, we sort of spoke about it on the other slide. I don't want to kind of beat the horse too much here, but this was really meant to emphasize, the traditional pharmaceutical model, which was, 1 FTE for every 14 doctors, which was a survey that was done in the US. Rare allows us to have more precision and more focus on singular customers. And I guess I'm going to skip, because I'm mindful of time. My question to all of you to walk away from this is, in Canada, whether you're, in postdoc, or if you're, again, thinking about starting up a company, how should we as a Canadian system be thinking about investing resources? Where can we go more for patients? Where can we deliver bigger so that no patient has to wait, access becomes clearer, and that we're able to bring these innovative therapies? Like, it's really exciting what's coming over the next few years, the next decade. Because I actually think we're coming up to an incredibly exciting point in pharma and across the industry where patients are going to have a lot of options available to them, where over the last 10 years, maybe they had one, maybe there was no options, maybe they didn't even know they had a disease, or a disorder. It's such an incredible time in medicine to be able to help society. And to me, that's what we're all here for, right? Is to help our fellow human. And I would say there's no time better in our industry than now, because we're at the forefront of the future. So maybe I'll open it up for questions, because I'm mindful of time.
Questions for Brent? Pedro, go ahead with your question.
Hello, thank you very much for the presentation. The emotion and knowledge really came through. My question involves maybe another approach, that is repurposing already existing drugs in the market. I don't know if Novartis has ever done this. I think it's in regulatory terms, it's being still much discussed how this process would come up, but using already existing drugs and repurposing for new applications, including rare diseases, if it's a viable option in the future. I really wanted to hear your opinion about this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I honestly think with the biologics, if you look at how those have been designed, there is an opportunity to explore, can we use a biologic in another therapeutic area? The one that I'm aware of, and I think I can publicly talk about it, is Ilaris, or canakinumab, which is the name, is available for autoinflammatory disorders or diseases, and it's also being explored in a host of other areas. So I think with biologics, there is an opportunity to explore, other areas, other potential targets too. I think there's still quite a bit we continue to learn overall as an industry about these therapies, and it's really exciting, right? When you get this like beautiful biologic, and you know where you're going with it, and you can target a specific disease, and then you hear it's being explored in another area, and you're like, wow, this is pretty incredible. Like, this little molecule can do so much. And I always think about Humira, right? Which, like, this incredible asset that's kind of blown up and I don't know how many indications it has now, but it has dozens of indications. To me, that's incredible, right? Because you're not only maximizing the value of that specific asset, but you have confidence in it from other diseases, and now you're able to bring it to the masses for other diseases. I think that's incredible if you're able to find those types of assets within your existing portfolios. So I don't know, Rob, are there other questions?
Not seeing any more questions. Final chance, everybody. Please don't be shy.
And I guess what I would say too is, if no one has further questions too, feel free to reach out. I think Kim King is the entry point, but feel free to reach out. Like, we're always open to have a discussion, to share. I mean, I love rare disease because you can really see the impact that you're having on humanity, right? In the US, you can see it physically, right? Of the patient that you're able to have an impact on. And I always go back to this kind of thought of, what we're here for, why I joined industry, beyond thinking it was really cool, was because I wanted to have an impact on humanity. And that's, I think, what you all hopefully will do, is to have an impact on humanity for the good, right? Being able to treat, cancer, being able to treat a disease that, we didn't understand before. That's such an incredible opportunity for all of us.
So if there's no other questions, if you think of something later today, or you're woken up in the middle of the night thinking about it, please contact either kim.king@novartis.com or feed it into us, and we'll be happy to follow up on that. I want to thank Brent for his presentation today. It was informative, and I really appreciated, given our mix of research and SMEs that are on the call today. Your discussion of some of the synergies between not only science and the business side of commercialization, but also the concept of medical engagement and where that fits in. I also, as you probably know through Kim, that Alberta is starting to really focus on developing a cluster around health analytics and diagnostics. And if we as a jurisdiction can be a leader in some of those, shortening the diagnostic odyssey for some of the patients, that would be a success for us economically, but also from a humanitarian standpoint. So thank you very much for your time today. So again, thanks to Brent and to Kim. I want to thank all of our attendees for being involved today and being engaged. I mentioned to send the initial questions in. After the session, there will be a feedback form coming out to you. Please fill out the survey, and we'll provide you the slides. Important is, are there any topics or areas of interest you'd like to see us cover in future Boosting Biotech mentoring sessions? Please give us your ideas, and we will take that back to the companies and bring forward more bright minds like Brent. Finally, I want to thank Novartis for providing us this today, and our partners, Innovative Medicines Canada, Alberta Jobs, Economy and Innovation, and Alberta Health. To everybody, as I always say, be safe, trust science, and have a great day. Thank you very much for attending.